As was said the other day, it's sometimes been suggested that we have to become divine scientists, divine physicists, and divine alchemists. That is to say, to learn to know the ways of existence, the workings of existence, to learn and know the laws of existence, and to learn and know the chemistry of existence. But it's also suggested that perhaps we also have to become divine psychologists, and that is to learn to know the ways of the thoughts. But since we can't separate our thoughts from our feelings, they intrinsically go together, we also have to explore feelings. And so you know the way of our gatherings, that is to present possibilities through story. There are several stories from very different persuasions. One from the Sufi tradition and one from the Jewish tradition. Let's see what feelings they evoke in us. The first is the story of a great Sufi called Al-Hajj. Now, as we know with many of the great Sufis, they become martyrs. There was an occasion when Al-Hajj was confronted by a group of people from his town who considered that he was practicing apostasy, heresy, and they came to his house, standing in front of his threshold, hurling abuse, decrying, deriding him. Al-Hajj came out onto his balcony and, seemingly totally unperturbed by the vitriol that was being hurled at him, he stood there listening to what the crowd was saying. But suddenly, amongst that crowd hurling abuse at him, there was a voice louder than all the others. It was spitting such venom that it was greater than any of the other insults that were being sent by the crowd at large. So after some while, the crowd turned on this man. His voice was so loud and his venom so vicious that their anger, instead of being hurled at Al-Hajj, was turned on the man. But just at that moment, Al-Hajj came down from his balcony, out of his door, and went up to that man and punched him in the face. With that, the crowd began to disperse, and each of them went their way. Now, after this incident, there were several dervishes who had witnessed this scene, and as they were sitting having coffee at the coffee shop, one of the dervishes said to the other, "How can this Al-Hajj call himself a Sufi when he let his anger get the better of him and punch that man?" The other dervish, who was somewhat more enlightened, said, "O man born to felicity, don't you realize that if Al-Hajj had not intervened, that the crowd who had turned their anger onto him would have done him great harm. The second story is about a young Jewish man who was born as the son of a well-known rabbi in their own area. But this young man, when he came to his teenage years, had a recurring dream. A dream in which he was instructed to go to another great rabbi, Reb Israel. And so this young lad asked his father to take him to the presence of Reb Israel. But his father, who was a proud man, said, "You have all the teachings and all the learnings that you need right here. You don't have to go to anywhere else." And he refused to take his son. But time went on, and the dream went on, and the young man begged and begged and begged his father, "Take me to Rabbi Israel." So, after some while, his father conceded. So they set out in a wagon to where Reb Israel lived. But on the way, the wheel of their wagon fell off. And so the father said, you see, that's a sign we're not supposed to go." And he forced his son to come back to their home. The son languished because the dream continued, until again the father conceded, and they set out on their journey. And this time they arrived at the edge of the town where the great rabbi lived. But it was late at night, so they decided to stay at an inn. But in the inn, the father got talking to a seeming man who appeared to be a traveller. And the traveller asked him where they were going, and when the father said that they were going to visit Reb Israel, the man said, "Him? He's the biggest fraud there is. Why would you want to go and visit him?" And so the father went to his son, told him what had been said, and said, "Come, we're not going." They turned back and went back to their home place. But after this, the son not only languished, but he paled and grew thin and ill, and his illness became fatal, so that he passed away. His father was bereft, inconsolable, losing his only son. But then, not long after, his son came to him in a dream and said, "Father, Father, go to Reb Israel. Go to Reb Israel." Now at first the father denied it, just a dream. How could his son visit him in a dream? But then again his son came beseeching his father, "Go, go to Reb Israel." So his father set out again. Again he came to the edge of the town. It was night, and so he went to the same inn, and there was the same would-be traveller. And they got into conversation again, and the rabbi passed on the news that his beloved son had died. And the would-be traveller smiled and said, "You see, I am an emissary of Satan, and it was known that your son was a great, great light. Reb Israel is also a great, great light. And if these two lights had met and merged, it would have brought unacceptable change to mankind." The rabbi, again, was not only chastened by this, but totally and utterly shamed. He went on to the house of Reb Israel, and when he was admitted into the rabbi's presence, the great Rabbi Reb Ismail burst into tears, with tears flowing down his cheeks. In the way of stories, even though it's most oftentimes asked of us, what is the deep meaning of these tales? The question that's asked of us now is, what is the feelings that these stories evoke in us? What is the feeling that arises in you from each of these tales? In order to claim divine psychology, like all the other designations, we have to experience the ways of life, the laws of life in operation, the chemistries of life. So too with our mind and our feelings. Perhaps the way of stories is a way where we no longer need to self-analyze, to go to a psychologist or a psychiatrist, because like becoming a divine scientist, physicist and alchemist, it's been the experiences of life that have brought the state where we can claim that of being a divine psychologist. So perhaps as we explore in the way of stories, we have no need for self-exploration. Painful as that is, because we all recognize that all the stories told are really our stories. Thank you, thank you, thank you.